Hello, and welcome to another episode of Tuesdays with Tally. The mission and the goal of this podcast is to bring an engaging conversation that will add value to the lives of everyday people. We will inspire, encourage, educate, and tell the stories of America's finest men and women in an effort to motivate you to live your life to its fullest potential. Be sure to follow us on social media and search Tuesdays with Tally. Be sure to subscribe, follow, and share the program as well. And now your host, Brian Tally.
Welcome back to Tuesdays with Tally Podcast, where we add real-life value to the lives of everyday people. Be sure to follow us on social media and on Spotify. The online information and handles are all located on the scrolling ticker at the bottom portion of your screen. We're on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Anchor FM, and Spotify. Simply search Tuesdays with Tally. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe to get every episode and stay up to date with the latest and greatest our guests in this show has to offer. Now, I want to know, are you a business owner? Now, I'm looking for you guys. I'm looking for guys who need to get the word out on their merchandise, on their gear. It could be anything. It can be an event, a service. Advertise your business right here on this podcast. Let me help you reach your goals. Let's put a marketing plan together and develop a strategy to take your business to the next level. And today I want to thank my show sponsor. It is dreamingaboutthemouse.com. Go to their website today and book your next vacation, dreamingaboutthemouse.com. Let them take care of the hassles of planning a trip so you can enjoy the unforgettable trip of a lifetime from start to finish. Dreamingaboutthemouse.com. Go online and book today. When you do so, email Lynn directly, Lynn at dreamingaboutthemouse.com. That's Lynn at dreamingaboutthemouse.com. And like I said, book that vacation experience of a lifetime today. Folks, we have a very special guest joining us on today's program. Claudia Ovalles and her husband underwent injustices in the family court system. Claudia then began using her own experiences to volunteer her time with the Texas support group and Victim to Hero Institute as an advocate for custodial interference and parental alienation awareness. After losing their children, Claudia turned her pain into purpose by assisting parents nationwide in learning their rights and pursuing judicial accountability. She became a strong legislative advocate during the 87th Texas legislative session while legislating for equal shared parent, custodial interference, and child abuse. She has worked hard over the last 20 months with her bill that will be reintroduced in the next legislative session. Claudia has a Master of Education degree in STEM from Texas A&M University, and she is the founder of Service Members and Veterans for Children's Rights and an advocate for the National Parents Organization. She recently accepted the chair position for Respectfully PAC to push legislative efforts further. She also works for the DOD and has stayed supportive to the military community. Claudia is a United States Marine Corps veteran, a mother of 2 sons, a stepmom to a bonus daughter, and she is happily married to Gregory, a U.S. Air Force retired veteran. Claudia credits her level of commitment and resilience to the Marine Corps. She truly wouldn't be here if it were not for the Corps, and she believes that experience has set her apart from other advocates. And with that, we are honored to be joined by Claudia Ovalles. How are you?
Thanks for having me.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Look, the pleasure is all mine. I know you have been through some circumstances, and, we don't wake up in the morning one day and say, I'm going to become an advocate. There's usually a reason why we get up and we start to stand up and fight for what's right. And in your case, you had your children taken away from you, correct?
Correct. Well, in my situation, it's often called, and I'm not sure if you're aware of it or your audience is, it's alienation. It's parental alienation. So it's when you had a loving relationship with your children at one point, and usually after a divorce or a conflict, another parent starts interfering with that relationship and that bond. And the way they do that is through different, tactics, whether it's smearing you or manipulative behaviors, or just not reciprocating that love, with the children around you. So for instance, a parent could say, hey, I want you to go make that call and call the other parent. But when the child's with the other parent, it's not reciprocated. But you could say, hey, I want to encourage you to go have that visitation, but the other parent won't do that. So over time, it damages that loving bond that you had. And that's what happened with me, but not with one son, but with two. So it was just very strange at the first time it happened. I didn't know what it was. I had a loving relationship, and then years later it happened with the second child. And I knew it was going to happen again. History would repeat itself, but it was about informing everybody that was involved, all these legal professionals. You have to start from scratch, informing them what's going on. Automatically, they assume that you have a high conflict case. When that's not the situation, you're dealing with a high conflict individual, which is a parent that, is not compliant. They defy court orders. They do not want to cooperate. And so they make it really difficult. And with the legal system, they can string things out. They can delay things. So what you think is going to, end within a couple of months, it could be strung along, for years. Mm-hmm. And by that time, you are you go through a financial hardship. You're mm-hmm. overwhelmed emotionally, and it takes a toll on you.
I have certainly been there. I've been in those same shoes. Now, of course, different stories, different circumstances. Now, I want to back up a little bit. I want to be able to tell your story in a way that will make sense, and it will be meaningful and will add so much value to folks out there who may be going through the same ordeal or the same situation mm-hmm. That you and your husband have found yourself in. And now, you have become a national advocate because of what happened to you. Now, I want to know a little bit about what happened. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the injustices that you and your husband underwent in the family court system. Can you explain how you got there and how that injustice took place?
Sure. So for him, what I witnessed was his daughter lived with us for a year. We were stationed in Florida at the time, but his divorce was through the state of Texas. So anything that had to be modified had to come through Texas. So, his daughter was living with us and she was thriving. She was doing really well. But, his ex-wife is the mom, wanted the child back. And oftentimes, when you send the child for a visit, they're either not returned, or that's when they file something. And you're not given a lot of notice. So you have to go, to court where it has a jurisdiction, which was here in Texas. And they reset it, multiple times. You're trying to inform your attorney of everything that's going on. And you're also trying to, handle your normal job. You're trying to handle your family life and things like that. But in his case, when we went to court, they used his service against him. He was asked to testify in his case. They, swore him in. They thanked him for his service, and they just turned everything around because he was an MTI here at Lackland Air Force Base. They used that as something to smear him because he trained, recruits. Apparently he liked to yell. And so they would, they use that. Oh, you like to yell. You yell at your daughter, you yell at people, you enjoy it, that kind of thing. And then when they also introduced, oh, you like to control people, because that's what he did. He was an MTI and he made sure that they followed orders to train them, during their boot camp. So it was just things like that. And it was, I was sitting there and I just couldn't believe that first of all, that this was being allowed. The judge didn't say anything. And then he was pretty taken back by just the audacity of them doing that. And so then, when it's done, they thank him for his service, and that's the end of the case. And what was determined was that the child go back to live with the mom. And so it was a really big struggle, because it really hit him hard. And I just couldn't believe watching it myself, honestly, because I didn't think that this is how service members would be treated, that they would have a little bit more respect for their duties and what they do. But one of the other things that was presented was that he was an absent father. So because he deployed often during his first marriage, it was instilled in the child that your father was never around, that it was always mom there. And so that was just another smear and a blow to him. But he was the only provider, so you sacrifice that time and you take these deployments and you sign up for them, or you don't have a choice, but to be smeared before a child that you're never around, you don't love the child, those types of things. And it's just awful. It's awful for the child to hear, but for the parent that's, that has to endure this treatment, it's ridiculous, honestly.
What was the relationship with his daughter and at the time of this court hearing, when the court saw that the child goes back to the mother?
It was really good. We were living in Florida, and it was me and my son and him and his daughter, and we got along really well. We did a lot of things. She was really quiet, but we encouraged a lot of activities and things like that to keep her involved. We always did events or functions, and it was interesting because it just suddenly just changed. And even after that, when she went back to live with her mom, there was such a disconnect. What happened was he didn't want to force it anymore. What he did was different than what I did going through my situation. He didn't want to force the child to come. He didn't want to go back to court. He didn't want to do that to the child at the time. But then there were 3 years that went by. He had no contact with his daughter. He was deployed. He had his last deployment. No contact with his daughter. By that time, I was back in family court dealing with my situation, which was my son lived with us after our stepdaughter moved back with her mom. And we had a Disney vacation. It was probably one of the best vacations we had. And I put him on the plane to California to go visit his father and family, and he was never returned. And that's where he's been since. But it went from a loving relationship to, you don't hear from them anymore because the other parent has just tainted that relationship so much.
So you and your husband both endured the same injustices in two separate cases in family court, correct?
Correct. So when my husband experienced this, he was dealing with an attorney that his ex-wife hired. And she was the one that questioned him on the stand. She had like a loaded gun. She had like her own professionals that when she took a case, she already had a lined up psychologist. She already had a lined up, whoever. They were like a team. So then when I went back to court, surprisingly, my ex-husband hired the exact same attorney. He actually followed my husband's case, and he hired the exact same attorney against me. So when I went back to court, she was the opposing counsel. And I kind of knew what her tactics would be. And that was, I don't know if that was a blessing or not, but when she put me on the stand, she really couldn't, affect me that way because I just knew how she was going to ask these questions. She literally had the same psychologist that interviewed our stepdaughter, interviewed my son. It was just, she had this loaded gun. She had everything set up the exact same way. And that's what the court doesn't see, is that a lot of these attorneys, they have these little teams of professionals, and it's accepted in the court system. It's like they're prepared for these cases, and these cases are already determined somehow, but it was the exact same thing.
To me, that just seems absolutely scandalous to watch one case so hard. Again, these are two different spouses here, and to strategize this future outcome based on the success of one attorney who ultimately took your bonus daughter away from you and your husband. Now, mental health crisis in this country is absolutely alarming. We are going through some suicides and teen suicide and veteran suicide in this country that we've never experienced before. I had on a crisis negotiator, if you will, and a teen suicide expert on the program about a week ago. And he says that the number one triggering point right now for teen suicide is divorce and breakup, and the amount of anxiety and the depression, in the fear, in the hopelessness, and the helplessness that these children, you got one arm pulling over here and you have another arm pulling over here, and you're completely ripping that child apart. Can you explain how this has affected your two children plus your bonus daughter after seeing their parents go through this on both sides of the aisle, and then having what their feelings and emotions are as they are enduring this long, drawn out, and painful process?
Right. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a huge thing also that I mentioned, during the advocacy, is a mental health crisis and how this impacts kids. When they're put in the middle, oftentimes they'll be told by the other parent what's going on, like adult situations, as like what's going on in the court system, what these legal documents say, those types of things. And what you're really doing to the child is you're putting them in a maturity, a level of maturity by involving them. And that's not healthy for them, because their mind is not developed. For boys, doesn't fully develop until 25. For young girls, I believe it's 23. So when you're actually introducing them into adult matters, or you're mentioning these situations that should just be between adults, it's harmful to them. They shouldn't be dealing with this stuff. Oftentimes that's what happens with me and my son. He'll want me to deal with my son for these adult conversations or these adult decisions. And that's not the place where the child to be. We're talking about a child here. But when we go back to what you stated about the impact, a lot of these children, they're in a loyalty bond, and basically they feel like they have to be loyal to one parent and gang up against the other parent, and it's unhealthy for them. It's one of the like you said, there are a lot of concerns with the depression, the anxiety. Some of these kids will have socializing issues, relationship issues when they get older. I've talked to many adult victims that went through this, when they were younger, and they all mentioned the exact same thing of how it impacted them, how they had trust issues, how it was hard for them to, when they were in a relationship, to, just to have a relationship, because they didn't know what was normal. This is what they were put through as a child. And a lot of these issues also are a result of single family homes. When you're only having one parent, but you're not receiving the love from the other parent, it does take a toll on you. Kids deserve love from both parents. So when they don't get that, it's really hard. And they don't see that right now because of their maturity level. But that's one of the biggest concerns that we have.
A very painful process. I was taken away from my dad at 3, and it is hard growing up without a father figure, and it could be difficult, again, not growing out without a mother figure in your life, because there's so many things that each parent can contribute to the maturity and the life of their child, in so many ways. But whether it's love, or working on a car, or learning how to be a man, or learning how to be a woman, there's all these different tools and tips and tricks and all this human development and all this stuff that's so important to the children. And again, both sides deserve that relationship. Now, the scary thing with you and your husband's case is that many people seem to think, the judge is going to take away my child because I have these DUIs, and I went out and I did some bad stuff, and I got arrested, and I've been neglecting my children. And I can see that case. Mm-hmm. But when you have successful people like you and your husband being treated like this, serving your country honorably. I mean, you work for the DOD, you're college educated, there's no endangerment here. And yet the system was still completely stacked against you. Now, again, you said in the beginning, I believe that this judge and this jury, or whoever it may have been who made these decisions that were not in your favor, used your service as a technique to say, perhaps you have post-traumatic stress, you're a drill instructor, you like to yell, you're gone, you deploy all the time, you're not fit to be a father or a mother. How does that make you feel when you hear that and when you see that, knowing the type of parent you actually really are?
It was honestly, it was a shocker. And again, we're going back to my husband's case. My case was a little different, but just knowing that the outcome was that they used all that to determine their decision, it was appalling because we did have a good family structure. The mom wasn't remarried. We were remarried. We were providers. I at the time I was working part-time there at the base that we were stationed on, and so it wasn't like that. Neither one of us were available for the children. We were always available. We were always doing things for them, and it was a really good family, system and our family dynamic. The children were very close in age. They went to the same school. They had a really good relationship. So when this happened, it was heartbreaking for him, but me watching how they did it, it was appalling. It was insulting, because you didn't expect that the court system was going to treat, a service member this way. And it being in San Antonio, this is a huge military town. So for it to happen the way it did, and for him, he wouldn't talk about it for a really long time because it was just a blow, to everything that he stood for, everything that he was doing. And it was hard to watch him. And what he did is he shifted his focus and he started pursuing his master's degree. And that's what he did. First he did his bachelor's and then he did his master's, but that's where he put his focus on because of the whole situation.
You have turned your pain into a newfound purpose, and that is dedicating your life to advocacy, to give the voiceless a voice through, again, your research, your development, your education level. Texas A&M. You belong to some boards. You really are a staple in the community when it comes to children's rights and advocating for those who feel as if they don't have a voice. Now, is there a big problem going on within the military when it comes to these children's rights and these parental alienation? Because of the 20-year war on terror, again, there is so much post-traumatic stress out there. There are fathers and mothers who experience combat. Now, when they thank you for your service, that's a slap in the face if you were in the court system when they just turn around and say, you're bad because you served your country. Explain what you see currently as an advocate and what the state of the military and veteran community is looking at right now when these breakups do happen and when they turn around and use that service against the active duty military member or a veteran in the case as you.
So what I witnessed was that that we know that the divorce rate is high in the military community. We know that when service members deploy, that length of time that they're away, it does impact, the spouse that's back home with the children. We do know that. However, a lot of times when they come back, it's hard to reunify because they've either had some combat related exposure, or they come back traumatized for some reason. They may be going into a divorce situation, and a lot of times these service members are actually served, motions and things when they're overseas, and those are supposed to be protected under SCAR. And a lot of times these service members are not prepared when they get back because of everything they're dealing with emotionally. But the system doesn't care. They really don't. So what you see in many cases is a lot of their mental health issues are used against them. PTSD is used against them. I've heard of it. I know a veteran where, it was used against him and he lost his parental rights with his son. I've seen it in other situations where they use it to say you're either unfit or you're a danger to your child because you suffer from this. Oftentimes when you go into family court, you'd like to exercise your rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that's denied. So there's a lot of things that you see, or I've experienced or I've seen with service members. But we do know that many times there's even false allegations against a service member, and right away the allegation alone, it's going to be taken so seriously. They're going to have that service member move out of the home, find someone else to live. They're going to allow the spouse to stay there, and it's a difficult process. And again, once that happens in family court, that's what they call the silver bullet. In cases, I'm not sure if the audience is familiar, but that's what that is. It's false allegations, and it's used as a tactic to get the upper hand in the custody case. And that's a huge issue across the U.S. is a false allegation.
Again, this is scandalous. I mean, to be attorneys involved in these cases, it's like, how do you even sleep at night when you're making up stuff again to win a custody battle that isn't always going to be working out in the best interest of the child? And the child needs a voice here. It's not just, well, whatever the state says goes, because we all know that what the state says a lot of the times, it's not, again, in the best interest of these childs. Now, the sad thing is that this doesn't make that father or the mother any less of a parent because they serve their country. And again, it's just horrifying to know that people are being put in these situations every single day. And they say in the state, in the United States, in the military, everywhere you go now, you see billboards, you got the shirts. It's okay to not be okay, right? Break the stigma of mental health. Well, I got something for you. It's not okay. It is not okay to not be okay. It is not okay to say, I'm not feeling good today because I'm feeling stressed out and I'm anxious and I have a lot of anxiety and I have depression and I'm being medicated for it. So it can help me get through the day, to help me be a better contributor to society, and to help me be a better father or a better mother. Now, I know people here lately that are losing their jobs, veterans that have great jobs, whether they're pilots or they're school teachers or they drive a truck for the county. And they have PTSD, or they have some sort of emotional health or mental health problem that is being treated, and they're working through it. It's okay to not be okay, but it's not, because the stigma will be used against you in the court of law. But yet that same judge and that same state will sit there and will preach to you, it's okay to not be okay. Explain that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can go into one of these cases and you're you're just a regular normal person or parent that's just been doing right. You have a job or you have an education, and the minute that you go in there, anything can be used, can be twisted around and used against you. A lot of these attorneys will know each other, and so they have their system of how they're going to introduce these cases. The other parent can file these ridiculous things on you, and that's going to be presented when the attorney speaks up. So that's what the judge hears. But then you can file things to try to, state the truth or what's really going on, or, what you're doing, to make this case end, and so we can get moving on, so we can, have a fair outcome. But a lot of it is never allowed to introduce. Evidence won't be allowed to be introduced. You trying to address the court won't be allowed. So it's really disheartening when you're not, listened to, and these cases are just, it's all about lining the pockets, because a lot of the clients are treated the exact same. You could be a remarkable person with no history, never being in trouble, being a service member, a veteran, anything like that, and it just won't matter. And it's just disheartening, because again, you just want to have a relationship with your child, but it's these high conflict cases are often fueled by the attorneys, and they'll delay them, and they will, you have to come back and you have to figure out what you're going to do next, because once you're in it, you're in it. And so a lot of parents, they either don't want to go back, or they start, representing themselves at some point. But it's just really sad the way, the family court system treats so many people.
We will never break the stigma of mental health when it is being used against you in the court of law in a way that it shouldn't be used against you. Children cases, that's an emotional piece there. Parents are fueled by the emotion of their children because that's who they love the most in the whole entire world. That, a man and a woman, they have a child, and that child is always going to be priority number one. And once you begin to go through a divorce or some painstaking times in life as parents separate, they both now are in a war. It literally becomes war. And again, who is the main people here, or the main person here that this is going to affect? It's going to affect that child. Again, it can be 3 years old, 5 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old. Like you said, the maturity levels, 20 and 23 or 26 and 23 for a lot of kids. They're getting into adulthood before they start to figure out, oh, wow, my brain's fully developed now, and I can begin to make a lot of these decisions on my own. Now, what you do right now as an advocate, can you explain how you help others kind of maneuver these muddy waters, or very swampy waters, if you will, the judicial system when it comes to the rights of children and the parental alienation, and the separation?
So one of the things that I learned going through litigation was that a lot of times a parent will deny visitation. So you have court-ordered visitation and you get denied, and your attorney right away wants to go and file something for a motion for enforcement to get makeup time, or let the court make the court aware of what's going on. Well, depending on your case, you may not get makeup time because the child may go back to school, or your weekend's over, or the visit's over, or spring break's over. So you get really there's no accountability. But what I learned in the state of Texas is there is a law called interference with child custody, and every state has one. And when I first heard about it, I didn't believe it, because why didn't my attorney tell me? This has been going on many times during the litigation. Why didn't my attorney ever tell me that this law existed? And what I found out later was the reason why was, it was two reasons. One, she's a family attorney. She doesn't know criminal law. And the second thing was that if she told me this and I pursued it, I wouldn't need her to file the motion for enforcement, because this is a crime that I would be reporting to law enforcement myself. These crimes are prosecuted by the district attorney or the state attorney in a state. So that's why. And when I mentioned it, again, she opposed it. And until I mentioned it again and again, and she said, go pursue it. What do you got to lose?
What is interference with child custody?
So in Texas, it's Texas Penal Code 25.03, interference with child custody. It's when a parent or an individual withholds or retains a child against a court order. Every state has a different version of it. In some states, it's a misdemeanor, but in most states, it's a felony.
Now, wouldn't that lead to the immediate arrest of that parent, or perhaps an Amber Alert that we're often alerted to on our phones constantly, because a lot of these, divorce cases really become public, and now everybody's involved in in a case, because let's face it, 90% of these Amber Alerts that we get right now are bad divorces.
Right. So what it means is that you would be reporting this crime to police or a sheriff, just like you would report any other crime, whether it was burglary or assault. But many times, I would say about 90% of the time, the law enforcement is going to tell you it's a civil issue. It's a civil matter. That's the most common, response. It's a civil matter. You need to get an attorney. You need to take this back to court. However, you already have a court order. You've already gotten that piece of paper, and it tells me what time to pick up, the child, where to meet. And that's what I'm doing. I'm exercising my parenting time. But there's another parent that won't comply. So I want to report this crime. I want to report this crime officer. And again, they'll tell you, they'll try to interpret the law. They'll try to give their opinion. We don't do that. That's not the type of officer that I am. Those are the kinds of things I've heard. You need to go back to court. You need to report this. And parents are frustrated because they've already spent thousands of dollars, long, lengthy litigation sometimes. And so what we've learned is that it is a crime. In San Antonio alone, there's about 1,000. I've done research and pulled numbers for the past 4 years. It is a bigger crime in larger counties like Harris County and Tarrant County, things like that. But it's a big educational piece on law enforcement, because this law is 40 years old, believe it or not. It actually goes back to the abduction of Adam Walsh. This was passed federally in the early 1980s, and every state has this law.
Incredible. Now, you had mentioned the interference with child custody and that your attorney didn't know because you had mentioned criminal law. Were you in criminal law or were you in family law?
Well, I was in family court, but when I mentioned pursuing this, why can't I report this? She doesn't know criminal. She's just a family law attorney. She doesn't know the criminal code. So she kept shaking her head. No, that's not what this is. And I had gone to a local event and I met with the sheriff and I asked him, what is this? Can you explain it to me? Because I just been denied a visit. I just called, the local police, and they gave me an incident report, and I need to know what I'm supposed to do. And our sheriff here is very helpful. He does enforce the law here. However, the city does not. And so he said, you need an offense report. And I said, how is a parent supposed to know there's different types of reports to request? Because I requested an incident report. An incident report is just informational. They just collect information. You could get a copy of that report, in about 10 days time. But an offense report is you reporting a felony, you reporting the actual crime. And it's a different process. And that's why when you stated, for abductions and Amber Alerts, a lot of times there's supposed to be a certain process that they're supposed to be following, because this comes out of the DOJ. This comes out of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There is a process for abducted children, and it begins at this step when you report this to an officer and they report it, whether they're going to, do a welfare check or whether they're going to enter the child into the clearinghouse. There's supposed to be a process. And we're not talking about, situations where a parent is 15 minutes late, 2 hours late. We're talking about retainment and withholding of a child. And it can be days, it could be weeks, it could be months, it could be years. And these parents don't know that this is an option because they've already, tried going back to court. They don't have the funds. They're frustrated and they just don't know what to do. And so when I discovered this, we were advocating a lot in Texas. I'm like, if this is in every state, we need to start sharing this, because this is a national thing. And if it leads to, if the withholding and not of not allowing the visitation, this is what leads into the alienating. This is what leads to the parent not complying so that you can have that relationship. And that's where it starts, is denying that visitation.
Yeah, the sad thing is so many of these attorneys know the income and the cash flow their clients have, and oftentimes they are milked for everything they got, and still will never come to a conclusion of what's going to be going on until they put that additional $100 in the slot, if you will, and another one, and another one, and another one. And again, the only people that win here are the attorneys.
Right.
And the people that are hurting here is the family, the mom, the dad, the child. And again, the financial hardship that turns into severe anxiety and depression. How am I going to make it through the day? And again, it all leads back to I don't have anything left to give. And is it even worth the fight anymore? And that's what separates the people out there that are struggling and have hit rock bottom to the people like you who stand up in the face of perseverance, or in the face of adversity and persevere and show signs of resilience, to standing up and fighting for what's right, no matter what it may do to you, to your reputation, whatever it may be. Now, I want to know what happens in your experience, in your line of work, in your line of advocacy. What happens when the child says, I only want to be with mom, I don't want to go to dad, but yet they're in court and dad's fighting hard for their kid? What happens then?
Well, that's where a lot of times, depending on the state, they will allow the child to have a voice. That doesn't mean that it's taken into consideration. They may be able to present, what they want, but it doesn't mean they always get what they want. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, if one parent, has a child and the child doesn't want to go, that's where you need to encourage that relationship. And the child doesn't know that, but a parent will say, well, they don't want to go. I can't make them go. I can't make them get out of the car. I mean, the answer is yes, you can. You make them go to school. You make them take a shower. You make them do your homework, right? You can tell them, we're not growing up to smoke pot and drink beer, and they'll listen to you. That's parenting. But when you don't encourage the relationship, you're actually empowering the child above the other parent, which is a problem, because now you're taking away that authority from that parent. It makes it difficult to discipline this child, because now they're testing those boundaries, but it's actually being encouraged by this parent who's empowering them.
Now, does the state ever interfere and look at the real best interest of the child? For an example, say you have a child who wants to live with mom, because living with mom is easy. I get to do what I want. I get to stay out late. My grades, then she doesn't care if they're good, if they're bad. I'm sexually active. I'm drinking beer, and you could say I'm experimenting with drugs, and I live this life of freedom. But if I go to dad's house, he's got rules, and I need to obey by those rules. Now, living with mom is great, but living with dad is called tough love. Now, dad's trying to prepare the child with the best opportunity in life, while mom is over here feeding into a possible downhill spiral of their child. Does the court ever identify this and say, absolutely not, mom, this kid is going with dad, even though this kid will kick and scream all the way out that door? That father will have that custody, if you will, and that mom will not, based on the information that's provided, again, by what happens at mom's house compared to what happens at dad's house.
Yeah, it depends really, because these judges, they're just so different, and they're trained so different. Sometimes they'll take that information into account. That you have a child that will be defiant. You have a child that's just one parent's just letting them run and do whatever he wants. Well, another parent will have a little bit more structure and rules, and want the child, raised right with discipline and accountability. And it's really hard because sometimes these kids are a little bit older and the court system's like, well, we don't want to cause major issues, even though what if you allow that, what are you really saying? That you don't have to listen to rules and laws. So to me, it sends a wrong message, but it's about encouraging the relationship with both. So you make sure that the child sees mom, the child sees dad. Most parents can co-parent, but a lot of them in these high conflict cases,
and it shows. I mean, it really does show in our nation. We have a massive problem with divorce and child custody. And again, I oftentimes see one household being simple and easy, and the other one being hard and structured based on love and trying to look out for their children's best interest. But when that doesn't happen, see, they don't respect authority, right? The children start to say, yeah, I don't need to listen to you because I can do whatever I want. And again, you have seen that dramatic climb in people and children and young adults not respecting authority because they haven't had to respect authority because they can do whatever they want, under mom's roof or dad's roof, whatever it may be. And I think today that's a big reason why we're seeing this dynamic shift into so many issues going on in our country right now due to the lack of respect and authority and, living a life of good contribution to the community that you live in. Now, what are you doing now actively in the Texas state legislature?
I did want to add what you mentioned a moment ago, though. It's like an entitlement attitude.
Yeah.
When you don't instill these laws and these rules and being held accountable, you have an entitlement attitude, and then you carry that on that everyone owes you something.
Right.
And that is what's wrong with society right now, is that you come across a kid that probably went through this and got to do whatever, and they have this entitlement attitude, and where is that family that you're supposed to, you have to instill these certain values. And when you don't have that opportunity as a parent, that's kind of what you get is a teenager or young adult with this entitlement attitude.
Yeah.
So back to what you said about legislation. In Texas right now, we are, and I've been pretty active for, I would say, the last 20 months, working behind the scenes to try to maintain relationships. After the last legislative session, we had a bill on custody interference, and it was called HB 4240. It was filed because of the many issues of custody interference. We were working at getting a bill that would allow a municipality to adopt a city order. So if a parent showed up to pick up their child and they were denied, now law enforcement can issue a citation. So they could actually issue a ticket, just like a speeding ticket or a parking ticket. And that parent that would receive the citation, it can be anywhere from from $0 to $500, and they'd have to report to municipal court and pay for that fine. Now, the law does not remove the felony. The felony is still there. However, these tickets will add up. And when I go and I present this to legislation, and I've talked locally with city council and my county commissioners, because I'm trying to be proactive, because I'm hoping this bill will pass, that we need to be ready in the city to get that ordinance passed. And so I present 5 things. We're in a mental health crisis right now, and kids need to be seeing both parents. We need to have less of these reported. It would actually generate money for the city, because now you have something that is occurring 1,000 times a month. So you're going to generate money, but it's going to reduce these. Another thing is that when an officer gets these calls, oftentimes they're categorized as domestic disturbances. Locally, they keep saying that domestic violence is high in our area. And if this is one of those reasons, because of these calls, the way they're categorized by the local police department, this would reduce that, because now you're going to be holding people accountable and you're going to be reducing these calls. I've spoken to so many officers that go to the same home on the 1st, 3rd, and 5th of the month because it's the same parent that denies the other parent their visitation with their child. And so, if we can reduce these, kids can start seeing that other parent. I mean, I pulled public records from our county juvenile system, and it tells you how many kids are coming back into the system as repeat offenders, how many kids are only living with one parent, not seeing the other one. So there's a lot of issues here that we're trying to resolve, but that's the bill we're bringing back. We also have another one, which was a surprise, and I've reached out to talk to them as well. And it's another custody interference bill, but it's called HB 559. It's actually a bill set to remove the statute of limitations on reporting custody interference, because right now custody interference is a felony. It's got a 3-year statute of limitations. If this bill passes, it would remove that statute. So you can report this, years later after that 3-year mark. And the bill is filed by Representative Cody Vasut. And again, the HB 4240 from last session, we're bringing that back. We're just waiting for that to be filed. I've been working on this for, like I said, 20 months, talking to legislators, talking to stakeholders, seeing what they think about this, because it's all tied to, alienating behaviors, the mental health crisis where kids can't see the other parent and they could be acting out. We're also advocating to oppose Caden's Law. Caden's Law is a reauthorization of VAWA. It's a federal bill that was passed down and signed into law back in March. It's about protecting children and keeping them safe from family violence, but there's some red flags in that law. For instance, and me always speaking on behalf of service members and veterans, this law would deny reunification counseling or treatment. And like I mentioned, oftentimes a service member comes back from deployment, they may come back to a high conflict divorce. If that leads to not being able to see the child or being denied that relationship and they need to work on it, they need reunification. They need to have some form of family therapy to work on that relationship to rebuild it. And Caden's Law denies that. It also doesn't recognize false allegations. It's a very one-sided law. We fought it in California recently. What the domestic violence groups who are leading this and pushing it, what they'll do is they'll identify a child that was murdered in the state, and they'll use that child's name to name the law after. We haven't identified the child or the name here in Texas yet, but I've spoken to legislators that have filed previous domestic violence laws just to inform them of what this means and how it's going to impact many parents, especially children, because it only covers protecting children from physical and sexual abuse. There is no mention of psychological abuse. There are other flaws also. For instance, any experts that would be involved are limited to just domestic violence experts. So you wouldn't have psychologists, you wouldn't have maybe facilitators, things like that. You couldn't get a teacher to testify. You couldn't get a police officer to testify. So they're limiting a lot of that. They're also requiring judges take certain training. So it's a really big overreach from the legislature to the judiciary. And that's the biggest concern, is they're really trying to overstep what the state can do. So that's Caden's Law, and that's coming. And every state is pushing for it because there's federal incentives behind it. And we know of 20 states right now that are going to be pushing this for. We've identified it in Florida, New York, Pennsylvania, California, Colorado, Ohio, and we're just working with other advocates to try to be prepared for this.
Imagine that. Government overreach. I'm not surprised. Now, I can totally see the domestic violence piece here as well. Again, something that's very scary as well. The sad thing is that being an advocate and what you do is it has to be just so exhausting and frustrating when you have the law enforcement piece that's out there working in the best interest and going by the law. versus the city judicial, the state judicial, or the federal judicial, who are kind of making up their own laws as they go. And a lot of times, oftentimes, what the law enforcement does is completely, in the shadows, and they kind of get tossed aside. And again, we already have a police shortage out there. It's like, why can't we just follow the laws that are on the books, right? And if we followed the laws on the books and we see a loophole and we see a need to add something else, you can add modifications into it. It's just so simple at times, but yet the bureaucratic, these measures and the government, they make it so hard because they're so comfortable in their day-to-day jobs. And at the end of the day, they don't care about you or really anybody else out there except for their own personal agendas. And that's where the problem lies. Now, we have a police shortage. You have a lot of cities that have defunded the police over the last several years. And when you have two adults acting like children and they're called to all these cases, you're pulling police officers off the streets that should be dealing with the real criminals, the bank robbers, the drug dealers, the people that are out stealing, and breaking into homes and your cars and shooting people and stabbing people. Like, it's like, this is just a big mess. Do we have any hope for the future? And do you see any breaks here in perhaps having that accountability and that transparency and getting some of these new laws in the courts to make this a better process for everybody involved?
Yes. And that was one of the issues I did leave off there, is that a lot of these calls take up resources, and it would relieve those resources so that an officer can, address something, that would be a little bit more serious than coming to the same spot to write a report for a child that wasn't there to exchange. And I've presented this again to legislators, to city council, to the county commissioners here. So they all have it. They know me very well. And, I'm just trying to also just share this information with other parents. A lot of parents have never legislated before, ever. I never did this before the last session. And it's really knowing who your representatives are, how to contact your representatives, how to send that email, how to talk to them, how to know that follow them on social media and go to, local functions. If there's a toy drive, hey, take a toy, go meet who your representatives are. Also, oftentimes there's a lot of judges in family court that, they have a lot of interesting findings, or their outcomes are pretty much the same. Hey, if you don't like a judge, you need to utilize your voice. You need to go vote. You need to get with other parents and band together and, meet with your legislature. Know where your capital is. Go to the Capitol and voice your concerns, because these things don't get fixed by themselves. A lot of parents are just waiting for someone to come in and be the hero. That's kind of who we are. We need to do this ourselves.
Right. And that's what makes us, us. We're both advocates. That's what we do, because we found ourselves in again, circling the drain, of injustice on in my story and in your story. And, you hit the nail right on the head. That's how to effectively advocate. And I made a 4-minute tutorial I'm going to share with you after this program on how to effectively communicate and how to effectively get a bill passed, whether it's in your city, in your county, in your state, or even at the highest levels in the federal government. And again, the work you're doing, it takes a lot. You're a tremendous champion. And folks, if you are going through any of this stuff that we have talked about today, I urge you to go connect with Claudia. She is there to help. She is a tool. She is an asset. heroesforchildrensrights.org. Connect with her today, Claudia. Her website, again, heroesforchildrensrights.org. Now, thank you for joining us today, Claudia. We sincerely appreciate everything you have done and continue to do in the military and veteran community. Your service, sacrifice, and dedication is truly admirable.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. Until next time, for Tuesdays with Tally, this is Brian Tally. Good night, Semper Fi, and God bless.